my topic has a little bit to do with adventure and the adventure of becoming. And so I was looking at how jokes have to do with adventure. So this is about a man who goes to Egypt on an adventure, on a holiday. And he thought it would be quite adventurous and fun to go on a camel ride. So he finds somebody he can kind of rent a camel from, for camel for hire. And so he's getting ready to mount up and everything, and he asks the Egyptian who's renting the camel from, how do I control the camel? And the Egyptian said, well, it's pretty easy. You just need 3 words is all you need. If you want him to walk, you say few. If you want him to run, you say many. And if you want him to stop, you yell amen. Okay? So he thinks that's simple enough. He takes his camel out on kind of a test ride, and he's mounted up, and he says, phew. And sure enough, the camel starts walking. And then he says, many. And the camel starts running. But he just kept running. He kept running. And they were like heading for a cliff. And the guy got so flustered he couldn't remember what to say. So in his desperation, he starts to pray. Please, Lord, save me. Save me, save me. Amen. He stops right on the edge of the cliff. And the guy is so relieved. He wipes the sweat off his brow and says, phew. Oh, no. Pretty silly, huh?
Love it.
You know you're going to be telling that to somebody. That's good. Phew. All right. Well, it's kind of about adventure. And we're talking a little bit about adventure today. It's the first Sunday of Advent. You can see that same root in there. The Advent season, it's the same root, has to do with the arrival of something important. It's what the kind of root word means, adventus. And it's in that word adventure. And it's at the heart of the Advent season, I think, is this idea of adventure. But the adventure isn't going off to Egypt or climbing a mountain or something external. The adventure is an inner adventure of our becoming. More of our Christly selves, more of our higher selves, our more expanded selves, becoming more of who we are and who we can become. The adventure is becoming. It's that becoming process, which is really going on with us probably all the time to some degree. But Advent is a particularly good time to reflect on it. And the Christmas stories give us ideas to reflect on, to apply to our own becoming processes. This is the ultimate adventure, I think, this adventure of becoming and becoming more aware of how we're being guided to expand ourselves in some way, to come up a little higher, to become more of who we are, realize more of our unlimited potential that's in us. So how does that begin? What's our role in this adventure of becoming? One of the things I think I've concluded over the years is that I think it begins with God. I think God launches the process. We get a little nudge to do something, to try something new, to stretch ourselves a little bit. Sometimes we talk about it as a little divine discontent. You ever have any of that? It's like you just get this sense you need to be doing more in some way. Maybe you'll have some sense of what area it's in, but sometimes it's quite vague. And sometimes we kind of have an idea what to do with that feeling at first. Sometimes it's a while before that comes clear. Sometimes God needs to nudge us more. Sometimes the nudges get a little pushy. Like if get bumped out of a job or something, that's pushy. But sometimes that's what you need in order to let go of something kind of secure, you're kind of used to, but really is limiting you at this point. I think we've all had feelings about that in some way or another, different circumstances in our lives. We're all of us in kind of a conflict, an inner tension maybe is a better way to put it, not necessarily conflict, between staying put and becoming. And being where we are, and right where we are, because we like security, we like to know what's likely to happen tomorrow, where we're going to be tomorrow and the day after that, and where our income is going to come in, and who we're going to be working with or living with or whatever circumstances, that they're going to be probably the same tomorrow and the day after that as they are today, although there's no guarantees for that. But we all have that side. Status quo, please, no changes. But of course, life will certainly bring us changes one way or another. And we're built for that. We're built for that too, because we also have this other side of us that really wants to be creative, really wants to use our gifts all the time we're here, really wants to, be in the flow of that energy that comes, that when you're doing something that you're excited about, a little passion in our lives, a little sense of being on purpose in a way that's meaningful to us and maybe a blessing to others too. That becoming process, that's the energy that rises up when we're embracing the adventure of becoming. We can feel that. We can feel that energy. And very often, God's nudges are going to be pushing us in that direction. Pushing us to risk letting go of our status quo a little bit and maybe open up to some new possibilities. That there might be a way to experience more joy, more freedom, more well-being, more good health, more joy. So we're called, in a way. We're called by God in us. And Joseph Campbell was the expert on the hero's kind of the journey and the adventure. How many of you have ever read or seen his work? I go back to it again and again, it seems like. But he talks about this, how we're called. This is how the hero with 1,000 faces, is his biggest book. It's the call to adventure. In little ways, in big ways. He says the call rings up the curtain on a mystery of transfiguration. It's a fancy word for becoming. Being changed, becoming. Here's a nice quote. The familiar life horizon has been outgrown. The old concepts, ideals, and emotional patterns no longer fit. The time for the passing of a threshold is at hand. I like that. I like that. So these nudges come. This call, we get a call in some way. And in his book he talks about lots of ways that call can come for us, as it does in all these mythologies around the world. There could be a herald, someone who sparks an enthusiasm in us. If you've ever met someone doing something you find quite interesting, if you ever run into somebody that seems to have just the right message for you at the time, that's kind of a herald saying, the call, you're being called. We get those. It could be a herald. Could be anything. Could be something we hear, witness, bump into. Could be a book we stumble upon. Could be a suggestion we see. Just any number of ways. I remember a friend telling me she was going through a difficult time. This was years ago. Worrying about health and mental health issues, and stumbled on in the paper reference to some visiting teacher who was teaching something called concept therapy. Anyone remember concept therapy? I think it was a kind of a self-help kind of inquiry and a thing you could work with to manage your thoughts better. Sometimes these things come in and out of fashion, and that was one that was very big in the 70s. It was called concept therapy. And she was just flipping through the paper, and whatever, the name of that and the description of it awakened something in her. It was a divine nudge, and she followed up on it, and it became a regular part of her life. And with the help of that new therapy or that approach, it guided her back to great health and freedom from concerns about mental wellness. And she became more and more of a teacher herself. Wonderful teacher and guide who really hears the voice of God is coming through her. There was a time when she was concerned about that, but God nudged her and guided her with something she was open to, and she took advantage of it. I think that's the way it comes. It can be in our relationships, this can come. There can be heralds all around us. I remember years ago, I was at church in Unity in Columbus many years ago. Jack and I sat right down in that front row for a number of years there. And they always had this extended fellowship time, like we do a little bit. Lots and lots of hugging and milling around and shaking hands. And some woman I'd never met before, she was visiting that day from somewhere, came up to me and said, "Are you here on a peace mission?" Out of the blue. and I said, "Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I guess I am." I guess we all are. And I thought, what an odd thing that was. But I really took it to heart. I thought, well, there's some guidance in here for me about maybe reorienting myself on my purpose in some way. God can find any number of ways to nudge us and guide us, sometimes in seemingly really miraculous and mysterious ways. So it can happen anywhere and in any context of our lives, at work, in our community involvements like at church, in our relationships with our family or our friends. We could be heralded, we could be getting guiding messages that really the hand of God is behind. The very fact that we're drawn into certain relationships might be because there's guidance for us in that relationship. So our antennae need to be up. How is God nudging us? How are we being called? Then the second part is we respond to the call. We recognize it and respond to it. And we know that we're being called by how we feel inside. There's an energy that rises up. There's a sense of knowing. This means this is important for me in some way. It's hard to describe, but it's something we've all felt. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. We've all felt it at some time in some way, a sense of knowing this is something I need to look at. Something I need to look at. We may be uncertain what we're to do with it yet, but we need to have an openness and a willingness, not shut down. Because the urge to preserve the status quo is going to be there too. And we might want to say, nah, don't want to look at that. But our role is to be open and willing to entertain this idea that there's something new for me to do here, some way to expand myself. The wonderful Christmas stories in the Bible, the nativity stories, give us wonderful clues to this. We need to be like Mary, who's told she's going to bear a child, and she's, how can this be? She starts with, how can this be? And then she says, here I am, Lord, let it be with me according to your word. Let it be with me according to your word. That's willingness to embrace the adventure of becoming. Now, know how that was going to work out. Should have, expected being socially ostracized and cast out and so on, but God nudges us. And when God nudges us to move in a certain direction, God will empower us to move through it. Mm-hmm. The power we need will be there. If we're in touch with guidance in us and we're following that guidance as it comes, what we need will be provided. We'll be able to do it. Another clue in that lovely story, Mary saying, let it be with me, we're told that she also, as the weeks went by, she pondered it in her heart. She pondered these words that were being told to her about the child she was to bring forth. She pondered all this in her heart. That's a clue for us in our becoming process. It's a kind of a gestation process in us as we are stepping out to become more of who we can become. We reflect on it. We may not be certain what it means for us yet or what there is for us to do exactly yet, but we ponder it in our hearts. We reflect on it. We let the ideas come, and we stay open and willing. Let it be with me according to your word. And eventually, an intention starts taking shape to something we think maybe we need to step out on and give a try. And it can be a very tentative first step, like dipping a toe in the water to see how cold it is. And we might draw back a little bit, and then try it again and find, I think I can step out in this way a little bit. Opportunities will be coming, ideas will be coming, guidance will be coming, and it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but we, guided and propelled by that divine nudge in us, we tend to step out a little bit. We tend to come up with something that seems like this is something I maybe should try or do, and be a little courageous about it. I always love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. She said, do one thing every day that scares you. I always like that. And she wasn't talking about riding a camel or climbing a mountain. She was talking about how you feel inside. Show up in a new way. Extend yourself to others maybe in a little uncomfortable way. Whatever it might be, something that's a little scary. I think of something like going to a church for the first time. Scary stuff. It can feel very funny going to a church for the first time. You have no idea how crazy these people might be, what might be a part of their religious practice. It can be very scary. It takes a little nerve to go into any kind of community for the first time. But you do it because you've got this this urge in you to expand yourself, to deepen your sense of who you are, or your sense of purpose in your life, or you want to experience more peace in your life. So we do something that's a little scary. We step out a little bit and we stay alert for that continuing guidance in that becoming process. And you know, as we go along, sometimes we're only a little bit conscious of what we're building in ourselves, how we're expanding ourselves. But I think, you know, sometimes we see it better in retrospect. But it's underway, even in those uncertain, confusing times where you won't even wonder why you're doing certain things. I remember feeling that way. It was the year after my parents both died, and I took up hospice volunteer training because I wondered what we had missed out on. We didn't have that kind of guidance and support, and so I went through hospice training. It was called Hospice at Riverside then. It's some different name now, but same location and same kind of program. And I did the training to be a volunteer, and I didn't know what I was going to do with that exactly. There was one little false start in my volunteer labor. I answered a call from outside. Somebody in the program said, "We need people to serve breakfast at the inpatient hospice facility. We're in desperate need of breakfast cooks." And I thought, okay, eager, started volunteering, forgetting that I don't cook. I'm not a good cook. It was very, very stressful. I think I maybe did it a week tops, and it was like 9 rooms, and everybody wanted something different for breakfast. And they're all dying. You know, it's a little pressure. If somebody wants ham, by golly, I was going to go down to Kroger and get them some ham, you know, and I didn't even know how to make oatmeal. It was bad. I got out of that quickly and became one of their regular home care volunteers, which was just visiting people in their homes, sitting with them, talking with them, often so their caregiver could go out and do errands or get their hair done or, you know, do something with a sense of normalcy. And it was very meaningful, and I know I was probably very bad at it at first and said a lot of not very helpful things, because sometimes it's difficult to know what to say to people, especially under circumstances like that. But I kept doing it, even though it was a little uncomfortable. And my most uncomfortable and probably the richest blessing I experienced was with a patient named Mary who had ALS. I might have shared about this before, but ALS is a tough one, and she had moved into a sister's home here. She was from out of state, so she would have someone to help with her care, her sister and her sister's husband and kids, and all her belongings packed into this little bedroom, all stuffed, even the windows kind of covered with all this stuff, and I never heard her voice. She'd already lost the capacity for speech. And we tried to communicate with a whiteboard she'd write things on, and it was difficult. It was difficult. It was sad. I've sometimes sat in the car thinking, you know, I don't have to go in. I don't have to go in, and yet I wanted to go in. That's that tension. It's that pull between knowing you're doing something you want to do, but you're on the edge of your comfort zone, and it's not easy. It's not comfortable, but I kept doing it, and I was richly blessed by it. She died at the inpatient facility a few months after that, and I visited her that final day, and was just so inspired by her courage, by her unfailing faith, and I had learned a good deal in the process about just being with someone, knowing you can't fix or do anything. There's nothing magical you can say, but there's a certain magic in just being able to be present with someone in a tough situation and a tough time. And I think that was a rich blessing to me. I wasn't doing church ministry yet. I couldn't have even known that would become quite useful to me later on. Not very much longer after that, I took it up. So isn't that interesting? God in me propelled the process. The guidance to do hospice volunteer work, where'd that come from? Came within. God was nudging. There was something I needed. I needed greater understanding. I needed a greater capacity to be with myself and others in those difficult times. It served me well later. I was richly blessed by it. It's an amazing process, this becoming process, and we don't always know exactly how we're becoming. What are we becoming? You know, what shape are we, what new shape, or what deeper self are we becoming? We don't always know in the moment. It's looking back, we see, wow, that was an important experience I had. I learned so much from that. I was struck by another story I stumbled on CBS Sunday Morning. Any of you ever watch it? We would record it, so I could watch it anytime. And there's, I just lost my battery, but you can hear me, can't you?
Yes.
I'll speak up a little bit. I always see some wonderful human interest stories on the show, and this was about a nurse of 35 years standing named Lori Wood at a hospital in Georgia, Piedmont Noonan Hospital. And she was really touched by a patient who was admitted. He was only like 26 years old and homeless. And let's thank Leo for his service. Thank you, Leo. This young man came in. He was autistic. He was 26, and he had been living with his grandmother until a few years before, and she died. And then he became homeless. And he was living out of a car and just getting by on the street by hook or by crook. I don't know how he managed that. But he became very ill, and he got into the hospital, and the doctors told him he had heart failure, and the only thing that would save him was a heart transplant. And as so often happens, I've heard of this before happening, he couldn't get on a transplant list because he didn't have a caregiver. Thank you, Leah. I didn't realize that. It does seem kind of not right, but somebody who doesn't have a home base and somebody to take care of them, they can't even get on the list. They can't even qualify for a transplant. So a nurse on duty that day was Lori Wood, a nurse of 35 years, something like that. And she said, I just didn't think that was right. I didn't think that was right. And she couldn't do anything about it as a nurse, but she could do something about it as a mom and a fellow human being on the planet. So she took him home and became his legal guardian to live with her and her grown son, and kind of made him a part of the family. So he was able to get on the transplant list, and he had the heart transplant surgery a few months later and came through it well. And the interviews were taking place where he was pretty much recovered from it and was planning to move out and get his own place again soon, but was still very much a part of the family. And just so touched, and he was so grateful. He said, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. He said, I call her Mama now. She's like a second mama to me, heaven sent. Heaven sent. The hand of God behind the whole thing. That he comes into this hospital of all hospitals, and this nurse is there, of all nurses, she's the one who would do this. They make a connection, and she can't let it go. There's a nudge in her. You need to do something about this. And she must not have known how it was going to play out. How comfortable is this going to be? What's he like, bringing him into my home? They hadn't known each other more than a couple of weeks. But she takes him home, and she says, he's family now. He's family now. He'll always be with us on holidays and things like that. What blessings, mutual blessings unfold when we get the call. That was an adoption call, kind of. Mine was a volunteer work call. But they're all about expanding the self and our capacity for being more loving, more peaceful, for being wiser, for being more creative, maybe. Whatever those, the call is always going to be nudging us towards something that will expand us, who we are, and what our lives are like, and the meaningfulness of our lives, and the richness of our lives. Because that God in us is always about that. Our becoming more of what we can be, and more joyful, more free, enjoy a more abundant life. And it's always mutual. And we always end this adventure. It's always a period in between adventures, because it never really stops, the whole adventure of being alive until maybe we're out of here. And I think we take the adventure onward, myself, after we leave here too, so it never really stops. But at the conclusion of every little adventure along the way, we have become something more than we were before. The becoming process, that is the adventure. So it's happening to us all the time, I think, in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of contexts in our lives. It's the human journey, really, this journey of becoming, and it's quite an adventure, and it's something that's particularly helpful to celebrate in this time of Advent, this Christmas season, about becoming more fully who we are, realizing more and more of that Christly self, that Christly potential that was demonstrated to us by Jesus of Nazareth, and by the Buddha, and by other way showers, that there's more possible for us than we can possibly imagine. Advent is a wonderful time to think about how we are becoming right now, and if we are being called to stretch ourselves a little bit in your work, in your relationships, in your life, in your spirituality, in any context of your life. Are you being called in some way? Are you being nudged? God starts the process, so we need to have our antenna up and be alert to how what we might be being drawn forth. We have everything we need to do it, to embrace that adventure of becoming and to step out in it. I often think about that wonderful egg tooth that birds have. You know, that all little baby birds in their shells have this little egg tooth, I think it's up here, that they can bang their way out of that shell with when the time is right. And they know by the nudge, by the divine nudge, you know, through their instincts within. They know when it's time to start pushing out of the egg and using that egg tooth. I think we have an egg tooth of sorts, and it's that always evolving spirit in us that doesn't want to be stuck in limited, cramped space, and always wants to be coming out a little bit more, realizing more of what we can become. So that's my quirky affirmation of the week. I embrace the adventure of becoming. Can we join in that? I embrace the adventure of becoming. Let's take that into prayer for a moment and affirm that truth within. We are ready and willing and alert to the voice of God within us, to the activity of God in us that may be calling us at any time to come up a little higher, to realize a little more fully who we are, all the rich potential within us, all the creative energy, all the love in us, all the wisdom. God may be nudging us to realize more and more of that through the days of the Advent season before us and far beyond. So we are alert, our antennae are up, our egg teeth are ready, and we are grateful. So it is. Amen.